Prince Alexander stood frozen in the doorway of Lady Margaret's mansion, his face pale as moonlight. The ornate chandelier above cast dancing shadows across the room, but nothing could hide what he had just discovered. Hidden beneath the floorboards of the library were dozens of documents bearing the royal seal, documents that should have been destroyed 20 years ago. Lady Margaret, the king's trusted advisor and Alexander's childhood friend, emerged from the shadows with trembling hands. Her usually perfect composure had cracked like fine china. "Your Highness, I can explain," she whispered. But her voice carried the weight of decades of buried secrets. Alexander's mind raced back to 3 hours earlier when he had arrived for their regular chess game. Margaret had seemed nervous, constantly glancing toward the library. When she excused herself to take an urgent phone call, curiosity had gotten the better of him. The loose floorboard beneath the Persian rug had practically called out to him. Now, holding a letter dated from his birth year, Alexander read words that made his blood run cold. The letter spoke of a substitution protocol and mentioned his name alongside another, Prince Marcus. His hand shook as he realized the implications. Everything he knew about his identity might be a lie. Margaret approached slowly, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. "Alexander, please sit down. What you've found, it's complicated. Your father, the king, he made an impossible choice years ago. There was a threat against the royal family, and desperate times called for desperate measures." The prince looked at her with eyes that had lost their innocence in a single moment. "Are you telling me that I'm not who I think I am? That somewhere out there's another person living my life or I'm living theirs?" His voice cracked with emotion he rarely showed. Margaret nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "The real Prince Alexander was hidden away for his protection when you were both infants. You've been living as him ever since, but your true identity, it's more complicated than you can imagine. The documents reveal a secret that could destroy the monarchy if it ever came to light." Thunder rumbled outside as if the very heavens were responding to the revelation. Alexander sank into the leather armchair, where he had spent countless evenings discussing politics and philosophy with Margaret. Those conversations now felt like elaborate performances in a play he never knew he was acting in. "Where is he?" Alexander demanded, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind.
"Where is the real Prince Alexander?"
"And who am I really?" The questions hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. Margaret walked to the window, staring out at the storm clouds gathering over the city. "He's closer than you think, Your Highness. In fact, you've met him many times. He's been hiding in plain sight just as you have been. The truth is, you're both royal blood. But the circumstances of your birth created a situation that required the ultimate deception." Alexander felt his world tilting on its axis. Every royal duty he had performed, every speech he had given, every hand he had shaken, had it all been built on a lie? The weight of the crown he was destined to wear suddenly felt impossibly heavy, even though it wasn't yet on his head. Outside, lightning illuminated the mansion's gardens, and in that brief flash of light, Alexander saw a figure standing by the gates, tall, regal, with features that looked remarkably familiar. His breath caught in his throat as recognition dawned. The man standing in the rain looked exactly like him. Alexander's heart pounded as he pressed his face against the cold window glass. The figure in the garden stood motionless, rain streaming down his face, but his eyes were locked onto the mansion. In the dim light, Alexander could see the same strong jawline, the same aristocratic nose, the same piercing blue eyes that stared back at him from mirrors every morning. "Margaret," Alexander whispered without turning around, "there's someone outside who looks exactly like me." Lady Margaret's face went white as she rushed to the window. When she saw the figure, she gasped and stepped backward. "Oh no, he wasn't supposed to come here tonight. This changes everything." Her hands flew to her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed a number with desperate urgency. "Who is he?" Alexander demanded, but Margaret held up her finger as someone answered her call. "Code red. The package has been delivered early." She spoke in hushed tones. "Yes, both packages are now in the same location. We need immediate extraction protocols." She hung up and turned to Alexander with fear in her eyes. The man outside began walking toward the front door with confident strides. Each step he took seemed to mirror Alexander's own mannerisms perfectly. It was like watching himself approach from a parallel universe. Alexander felt dizzy, questioning his own reflection, his own existence. Margaret grabbed Alexander's arm with surprising strength. Listen to me carefully. That man's name is Marcus, and he is the real Prince Alexander. You are Prince Marcus, the king's brother's son. 23 years ago, there was an assassination attempt on the royal family. Your uncle, Prince Edmund, was killed, but not before he made your father promise to protect you by raising you as his own son. Alexander staggered backward, the weight of revelation crushing down on him. So I'm the king's nephew, not his son? And he? Alexander pointed toward the approaching figure. He's been living as a commoner while I've been preparing to inherit. His throne? The doorbell rang 3 times, a specific pattern that made Margaret freeze. He knows the old code. Someone has been teaching him about the palace protocols. This is worse than I thought. Alexander's mind reeled with questions, but the sound of footsteps on the marble entrance floor meant time was running out. Why now? Why reveal this secret after all these years? Margaret pulled out another document from a hidden compartment in her desk. Because your father, the king, is dying, Alexander. I mean Marcus. He has only weeks left, and he wants to make things right before he passes. He planned to tell you both gradually, but someone else found out about the switch and has been blackmailing the royal family. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, getting closer to the library door. Alexander could hear his own breathing, or perhaps it was the breathing of the man who should have been living his life. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was about to meet himself, except it wasn't himself at all. What does he want? Alexander asked, pressing his ear to the door. The same thing you want, Margaret replied grimly. Answers, but unlike you, he's been living as a gardener at the palace for the past 5 years, watching you from afar, knowing that you were living the life that should have been his. He's angry, confused, and he has every right to be. The footsteps stopped directly outside the library door. A voice called out, a voice identical to Alexander's own, but carrying a rougher edge born from years of manual labor and hidden resentment. I know you're in there, Your Highness. Or should I say your falseness? We need to talk, brother. Alexander's blood ran cold. The word, brother, was spoken with such bitterness that it cut through the air like a blade. Margaret moved to stand, protectively in front of Alexander, but he gently moved her aside. If he's been at the palace for 5 years, that means. Alexander's voice trailed off as another horrifying realization hit him. Margaret nodded solemnly. Yes, he's been watching you, learning your habits, studying your mannerisms. He knows everything about your life, while you knew nothing about his existence. And now, someone has promised him that he can reclaim his rightful place as the heir to the throne. The door handle turned slowly, and Alexander found himself face to face with his own reflection. Except this reflection carried the weight of betrayal and the fire of righteous anger in his eyes. The 2 men stood facing each other in complete silence, the air thick with tension and disbelief. It was like looking into a mirror, except this mirror reflected a life of hardship and hidden truths. Marcus, the real Prince Alexander, was dressed in simple work clothes, his hands calloused from years of physical labor, but his bearing was unmistakably royal. Hello, cousin, Marcus said, his voice dripping with irony, though I suppose we should call each other by our real names now. I'm Alexander Edmund Blackwood, rightful heir to the throne. And you are Marcus Edmund Blackwood, the substitute prince who's been living my life. Alexander felt the room spinning around him. Everything he thought he knew about himself was crumbling like sand through his fingers. You've been at the palace all this time? Working in the gardens while you attended royal galas, met world leaders, and prepared for a crown that was never meant for you. Marcus finished bitterly. Yes, I've been there, watching you stumble through speeches that I could have given better. Watching you make decisions about a kingdom that should have been mine to rule. Margaret stepped between them, her voice pleading. Please, both of you need to understand the situation. Your lives were switched to save you both. There were threats, assassination attempts. The king made the only choice he could to protect his family. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Protection? I've been living in a cottage behind the palace stables for 5 years, Marcus. 5 years of watching my supposed cousin live in luxury, while I mucked out horse stalls and trimmed hedges. Tell me how that was protecting me. Alexander's guilt was overwhelming. I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea any of this existed. If I had known, you'd have what? Stepped aside? Given up the only life you've ever known? Marcus walked around the library, touching the expensive books and artwork with reverence and resentment. Do you know what it's like to watch someone else live your life? To see them wear clothes that should have been yours, eat at tables where you should have been sitting? The storm outside grew stronger, lightning illuminating the room in brief, dramatic flashes. In those moments of bright light, the resemblance between the two men was even more startling. They were identical in every physical way, but their expressions told completely different stories. Margaret pulled out her phone again as it buzzed urgently. The king wants to see you both now. He says the blackmailer has made contact and is threatening to release the story to the press unless his demands are met. What does he want? Alexander asked, though he dreaded the answer. Money? Marcus suggested cynically. Power? Or maybe he wants to watch the monarchy burn down from the inside. Margaret's face was grave as she read the message. He wants the real Prince Alexander to publicly claim his rightful place on the throne, and he wants Marcus to be exiled from the country in disgrace. He's given us 48 hours before he releases documents and photographs proving the deception. Alexander felt the weight of the crown he had never actually earned pressing down on his shoulders. Photographs? What photographs? Pictures of the infant switch, Margaret explained. Pictures of meetings between your father and your uncle. Documents bearing both your real signatures from when you were children. Evidence that would prove the entire royal line has been built on a lie. Marcus moved to the window, staring out at the palace lights visible in the distance. You know what the ironic part is? I don't even want the crown anymore. 5 years of watching you struggle with royal duties taught me something. Being king isn't about birthright, it's about dedication. And you, cousin, you've dedicated your entire life to being something you're not. Alexander felt a flicker of hope. Then we can work together. We can find a way to... But I want my identity back, Marcus interrupted firmly. I want people to know who I really am. I want to stop hiding in shadows while you live in the spotlight. Even if I don't want the crown, I want my name back. Margaret's phone rang again, and this time her face went completely pale. It's the blackmailer, she whispered. He says he has one more surprise for both of you. Something that will change everything you think you know about this situation. Alexander and Marcus exchanged glances, their mutual animosity momentarily forgotten in the face of this new threat. Whatever secret was still hidden, it was big enough to make someone risk threatening the royal family directly. Answer it, Marcus said grimly. At this point, how much worse can the truth get? Margaret answered the call and put it on speaker. A distorted voice filled the room, mechanical and menacing. Good evening, princes. I hope you're both sitting down because the real secret isn't about who you are. It's about why you were really switched. The distorted voice continued, each word falling like a hammer blow in the silent library. The assassination attempt on Prince Edmund wasn't random terrorism, as the world was told. It was an inside job, ordered by someone within the palace walls, someone who wanted both princes dead so they could claim the throne for themselves. Alexander and Marcus stood frozen, their earlier animosity forgotten in the face of this revelation. Margaret's face had gone ashen, and she gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles were white. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. The investigation was thorough. The terrorists were caught and... The terrorists were hired guns, the voice interrupted, paid by someone who has been playing the long game for over 2 decades. Someone who has been waiting patiently while you two lived your switched lives, gathering evidence to destroy you both when the time was right. Marcus stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage. Who? Who ordered my father's death? The phone crackled with what might have been laughter. Ask Lady Margaret. She's known the truth all along. Haven't you, Margaret? Tell them about the real reason you've been protecting these documents. Tell them about your midnight meetings with the person who really runs this kingdom. All eyes turned to Margaret, who seemed to shrink under their combined gaze. Her composure, which had held together through years of palace intrigue, finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed into a chair. I had no choice, she sobbed. They threatened to kill both of you if I didn't cooperate. For 23 years I've been walking a tightrope, protecting you both while serving 2 masters. Alexander felt his legs give way as he sank onto the couch. Margaret, what have you done? The person behind this, they've been using me to watch you both, to report on your activities, to make sure neither of you ever got too close to discovering the truth. But I never betrayed you completely. I never gave them everything they wanted. Marcus's military training kicked in as he began pacing, his mind working through the implications. So someone has been controlling our entire lives from the shadows. They killed my father, separated us as babies, and has been manipulating us ever since. The question is, why wait until now to reveal themselves? The voice on the phone answered as if reading his thoughts. Because the king is dying, and soon there will be a succession. The plan was always to eliminate both princes at the right moment and install the true power behind the throne. But circumstances have changed, and patience has run out. Alexander's mind raced back through years of palace life, trying to identify who could have wielded such influence without detection. Margaret, who is it? Who has been pulling the strings? Margaret looked up with red-rimmed eyes, her voice barely a whisper. Queen Isabella. The silence that followed was deafening. Queen Isabella, the king's sister-in-law, the woman who had comforted Alexander after his supposed uncle's death, who had been a motherly figure throughout his childhood, the woman who would be regent if anything happened to the royal line before Alexander was officially crowned. That's impossible, Alexander stammered. Isabella loved Uncle Edmund. She mourned him for years. Did she? The voice on the phone challenged. Or did she simply play the role of grieving widow while planning her ultimate ascension to power? Think about it, princes. Who had access to palace security schedules? Who knew about the infant switch? Who has been in position to manipulate events for decades? Marcus slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a crack in the expensive plaster. She's been at the palace this whole time. She's seen me working in the gardens. She knows exactly who I am. Margaret nodded miserably. She's known from the beginning. She's the one who suggested I hire you as a gardener 5 years ago. She wanted to keep you close, to monitor you, and to have you available when she was ready to make her move. Alexander felt sick as memories flooded back. Isabella's seemingly innocent questions about his future plans, her suggestions about policy directions, her presence at every major royal decision. She had been shaping his entire reign before he even inherited the crown. What does she want from us now? Alexander asked. The phone crackled again. Simple. Tomorrow night at the state dinner you will both attend. Prince Marcus will publicly reveal his true identity and claim the throne. Prince Alexander will abdicate in disgrace, admitting to the deception. And then, tragically, both princes will suffer a terrible accident during the subsequent chaos. And then Isabella becomes regent indefinitely, Marcus finished grimly. With no direct heirs and the royal line in shambles, the people will beg for stable leadership. Queen Isabella, the beloved widow who lost her husband to terrorism and now watches her nephews destroy each other, will reluctantly accept the crown to save the nation. Alexander stood up, his resolve hardening. We won't play her game. Oh, but you will, the voice replied coldly. Because if you don't, the evidence of your deception will be released anyway, and Margaret's daughter will pay the price for her mother's cooperation. Margaret gasped. You promised Sarah would be safe if I cooperated. Sarah was insurance. Now she's leverage. You have 18 hours to decide, princes. Play your parts in tomorrow's performance or watch the monarchy burn and take innocent lives with it. The phone went dead, leaving the three of them in stunned silence. Outside, the storm reached its peak, as if nature itself was responding to the revelation of decades of lies and manipulation. Alexander and Marcus looked at each other, no longer seeing an enemy or a rival, but recognizing they were both victims of a game much larger and more dangerous than either had imagined. Dawn broke gray and ominous over the palace as Alexander and Marcus sat in the king's private chamber, watching their father struggle with each labored breath. The oxygen mask couldn't hide the determination in his eyes as he listened to their account of the previous night's revelations. Despite his weakness, King Edmund's mind remained sharp as a blade. Isabella, he whispered, removing the mask briefly. I should have seen it sooner. She was always ambitious. But I thought grief had changed her after Edmund died. He coughed violently, specks of blood staining his lips. She's been playing a 23-year game of chess, and we've all been her pieces. Marcus leaned forward, his gardener's clothes replaced by borrowed royal attire that fit him perfectly. Father, we need to know everything. Every detail about the night of the switch, every person who was involved. If we're going to stop her, we need to understand her complete plan. The king's eyes moved between his biological son and his nephew, seeing the resemblance that had made the deception possible, but also noting the subtle differences that years of different lives had created. Alexander carried himself with practiced royal bearing, while Marcus possessed a grounded strength born from honest work. The switch wasn't just about saving your lives, the king admitted painfully. Isabella convinced me that having two princes with identical appearances could be the ultimate insurance policy for the monarchy. One could always step in if something happened to the other. She said it was brilliant strategic planning. Alexander felt another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. So she's known about Marcus's existence all along, and she's been planning to use us against each other when the time was right. But why now? Marcus asked. Why couldn't she wait for the king to die naturally and simply manipulate whoever inherited the throne? Margaret, who had been silent in the corner, spoke up with exhausted desperation. Because there's something else. Something I never told you. She pulled out a final document from her coat. Isabella isn't just the king's sister-in-law. She's pregnant. The room fell dead silent except for the king's labored breathing. The revelation hung in the air like a physical weight, pressing down on everyone present. That's impossible, Alexander stammered. She's 48 years old and she hasn't been seen with anyone romantically since Uncle Edmund died. Margaret's voice was barely audible. The father is someone inside the palace, someone with access to royal DNA records who could ensure the child would have a legitimate claim to succession, someone who's been helping her plan this coup from the beginning. The king's eyes widened with understanding and horror. The royal physician, Dr. Harrison, he's had access to genetic samples from the entire royal family for years. He could have created an heir with actual royal blood. Marcus finished, his military mind quickly grasping the implications. Even if we both die or are discredited, Isabella would still have a biological claim to the throne through her child. Alexander stood up abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the palace grounds. She's not just planning to eliminate us. She's planning to establish a completely new royal line with herself as the founding monarch. Our deaths would just clear the path. The king struggled to sit up higher in his bed. How long do we have before she makes her move? Margaret checked her phone. The state dinner is in 10 hours, but there's something else. I've been getting reports from palace staff that Isabella has been meeting with members of parliament privately over the past week. She's been preparing them for what she calls constitutional crisis that will require strong leadership. Marcus moved to his father's bedside, taking the frail hand in his work-hardened grip. What do you want us to do? As your sons, what would you have us choose? The king's eyes filled with tears as he looked at both young men. I want you to save each other. I want you to save the monarchy, but not at the cost of your lives. 23 years ago, I made choices based on fear and desperation. Today, you must choose based on love and wisdom. Alexander returned to the bedside, placing his hand over both his father's and Marcus's. Then we work together. We turn Isabella's own game against her. How? Marcus asked. Alexander's mind was racing, formulating a plan that was either brilliant or completely suicidal. By giving her exactly what she wants, but not in the way she expects it. Tonight at the state dinner, we'll reveal the truth about our identities, but we'll control the narrative, not her. Margaret looked skeptical. She has evidence, witnesses, and leverage. How can you possibly control this situation? Because she's made one crucial mistake, Alexander said, a smile playing at his lips for the first time in hours. She's underestimated what two brothers can accomplish when they finally start working together, instead of against each other. Marcus caught on to Alexander's thinking immediately. She's planned for us to be enemies, for us to destroy each other in front of the world. But what if we stand together instead? The king's breathing seemed to ease slightly as hope flickered in his tired eyes. Tell me your plan, my sons. Alexander and Marcus exchanged a look of mutual respect and understanding. They had been pawns in Isabella's game for their entire lives, but tonight they would become the players. Tonight they would rewrite the rules entirely. First, we need to contact the media, Alexander began, but not to deny the story, to tell it ourselves completely, with full transparency. Second, We need to gather our own evidence about Isabella's involvement in Uncle Edmund's death. And third, the king prompted weakly. Marcus smiled grimly. Third, we give the people of this kingdom a choice they've never had before, the chance to choose their own royal future, rather than having it chosen for them. Outside the window, the storm clouds were finally beginning to clear, but everyone in the room knew that the real storm was just beginning. The Great Hall had never seen anything like it. Every major news outlet in the kingdom was present, their cameras focused on the two identical young men standing side by side at the podium. The state dinner guests sat in stunned silence as Alexander and Marcus prepared to address the nation together, their matching formal attire making their resemblance even more striking. Queen Isabella sat at the high table, her face a mask of controlled fury. She had arrived expecting to orchestrate a public destruction of both princes, only to find them united and in control of the narrative. Dr. Harrison sat beside her, pale and nervous, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. Alexander stepped forward first, his voice clear and steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. Citizens of our beloved kingdom, my brother and I stand before you tonight to tell you a story of love, sacrifice, and the lengths a family will go to protect those they cherish. Marcus moved closer to the microphone, his rough-edged voice providing a perfect counterpoint to Alexander's polished tones. 23 years ago, our father, King Edmund, made an impossible choice. Faced with credible threats against the royal family, he agreed to a desperate plan that would save both our lives but require us to live as different people. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word as the truth unfolded. Alexander continued, I am Prince Marcus, son of the late Prince Edmund. The man beside me is Prince Alexander, the rightful heir to this throne. We were switched as infants, not out of deception, but out of love. Isabella's composed mask finally cracked. She stood abruptly, her voice cutting across the hall. This is preposterous. These men are clearly disturbed, making wild accusations to cover their own deception. Marcus smiled calmly and nodded to Margaret, who stepped forward with a briefcase full of documents. We have evidence of everything, Your Majesty, including evidence of who really orchestrated the assassination attempt that killed my father. The room erupted in shocked murmurs as Margaret began distributing copies of financial records, communication logs, and medical documents to the press. Each piece of paper told part of the larger story: payments made to known criminals, coded messages between Isabella and Dr. Harrison, and most damning of all, genetic testing results proving Isabella's pregnancy with artificially created royal DNA. Dr. Harrison broke first, his voice shaking as he stood up. I was forced into this. She threatened to destroy my career, my family. I never meant for anyone to die. Isabella whirled on him, her royal composure completely shattered. You fool. You're ruining everything. Alexander raised his hand for silence, and remarkably the crowd obeyed. The evidence shows that Queen Isabella has been manipulating events for over 2 decades, culminating in a plan to eliminate both legitimate heirs and install herself as monarch through an artificially created child with royal genetics. Marcus stepped forward again. But we're not here tonight to seek revenge or to point fingers. We're here to offer our kingdom something it has never had before: a choice. The cameras zoomed in as Alexander continued their prepared statement. The monarchy has survived for centuries on the principle of divine right and bloodline succession. But perhaps it's time to evolve. Perhaps it's time for the people to have a voice in their own royal future. Isabella made one last desperate attempt to regain control. This is treason. These men are traitors to the crown. No, Your Majesty, Marcus replied firmly. We are loyal to the kingdom and its people, which is why we're proposing a national referendum. Alexander outlined their unprecedented proposal. In 6 months' time, the people of this kingdom will vote on 3 options. First, Prince Alexander can claim his birthright and rule as traditional monarch. Second, I can continue as the trained heir, bringing a different perspective to royal leadership. Third, the people can choose to establish a new form of constitutional democracy with elected leadership. The hall buzzed with excitement and shock. Never in the kingdom's history had such a choice been offered to the citizens. Marcus added, whatever the people choose, both of us pledge to serve our kingdom faithfully, whether as monarchs, as private citizens, or in whatever capacity the people deem appropriate. Isabella's final card was played in desperation. And what of the succession? What of the future of the royal line? Alexander and Marcus exchanged a knowing look before Alexander answered. The royal line will continue in whatever form the people choose. If they choose monarchy, either of us is prepared to marry and produce heirs through love, not genetic manipulation. If they choose democracy, we'll serve as the kingdom's first elected leaders if they'll have us. Margaret stepped forward with the final piece of evidence, audio recordings of Isabella's conversations with her mysterious blackmailer, who turned out to be Dr. Harrison himself, creating leverage to ensure both their participation in the conspiracy. As security moved to escort Isabella and Dr. Harrison from the hall, she turned back with venomous fury. This kingdom will fall without proper royal leadership. You're destroying centuries of tradition. Marcus's response was gentle but firm. We're not destroying tradition, Your Majesty. We're allowing it to evolve. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to a kingdom is trusting its people to choose their own destiny. The broadcast ended with both princes standing together, no longer rivals or strangers, but brothers united in service to something greater than their individual ambitions. The switcheroo that had begun as a desperate survival tactic had ultimately created something unprecedented. Two leaders who valued the kingdom's welfare above their own power. In the months that followed, the kingdom engaged in the most democratic debate in its history. Citizens held town halls, debated in parliaments, and ultimately made their choice. But regardless of the outcome, the precedent had been set. Leadership through service rather than birthright, and the courage to trust people with their own future. The storm that had begun with hidden documents in Margaret's house had cleared, revealing not destruction but renewal, and two young men who had lost their individual identities had found something far more valuable. A shared purpose that transcended crowns, titles, and the accidents of birth.